People are always asking me whether there was any humor to be found in the war, and I tell them, categorically, unequivocally, without a shadow of a doubt, no. It was a dark and terrible business, and anyone who tells you otherwise has clearly never queued 40 minutes in the rain for a tin of powdered egg. Then I let the pause sit a moment, and I tell them, well, almost none. Tonight I'll give you 4 examples of that almost. 3 of them make me look rather dashing. The 4th does not, and I'm telling it anyway, because my wife insists it's the only one anyone ever actually remembers. Let me take you back to London, autumn of 1940. The bombs were falling. The tea was rationed to something approaching theological debate, and I, then a very junior warden with a tin hat 2 sizes too large, was doing my bit for king and country on the Tuesday night shift. I'd had 6 weeks of training, which consisted mainly of 41 distinct types of whistle blast and precisely nothing on what one was meant to do after blowing one. But I had a tin hat, a stirrup pump, and an entirely unearned sense of authority, which, as it turned out, was really all the war required of any of us. The mine had come down 2 streets over and taken the front clean off Pemberton and Sons, gentlemen's outfitters. I arrived at the head of a small party, shouting instructions with a confidence I had not remotely earned. "Stretcher party, with me! Everyone else, keep back, keep calm, and mind the glass!" I still maintain it's an excellent line, delivered superbly. What I found was a scene of considerable carnage. Bodies, and I do mean bodies, strewn the length of the shopfront, more or less exactly as depicted in the training pamphlets, which, I confess, gave me a small, entirely inappropriate thrill of professional validation. I began with great solemnity, directing the recovery effort. I even knelt beside one poor fellow, face down in the gutter, and commenced what I was fairly certain was correct first aid procedure, only to find his arm came away rather more easily than anatomy generally allows. It was the ambulance driver, a woman with considerably more sense than I possessed that evening, who pointed out that my patient was wearing a permanent, painted-on expression of mild disdain, and had in fact been modeling a herringbone overcoat in the window not 2 hours before. We had rescued 11 mannequins and 1 genuinely unconscious pigeon. I saluted the pigeon, purely to maintain some consistency of standards. The shop's proprietor turned up shortly after, considerably more distressed about the state of his window display than the state of his window, and informed me, with real feeling, that I had set the whole autumn collection back a fortnight. I did not know, until that moment, that I was capable of apologizing to a mannequin. Before the second story, a word on blackout discipline. We took it seriously, perhaps too seriously. I personally challenged a lit cigarette, a suspiciously mobile firefly, and, on one memorable evening, Mrs. Halloran's luminous wristwatch, which, I insisted, at some volume, constituted a beacon for the entire Luftwaffe. Mrs. Halloran did not speak to me again until 1943. I maintain I was technically correct, which is, I've since learned, the very worst kind of correct to be. Puddle diplomacy. Some weeks later, walking home in a downpour that seemed personally aggrieved with me, the siren went, and I threw myself into the nearest ditch the way we'd been drilled to. A moment later, a considerable weight landed squarely on my back. "I do hope you don't mind," said a voice from somewhere near my left shoulder blade. "Only I've a meeting with the ministry in the morning, and I really can't arrive looking as though I've swum there." I informed him, with the diplomatic restraint for which the Home Guard was not especially famous, that my spine was not, in fact, Home Office property set aside for the comfort of the well-tailored. Then I rolled sharply to the left. The gentleman found the puddle. The puddle, I am pleased to report, found him back. He called after me, dripping and, I thought, rather unfairly, that I was a disgrace to the uniform. I called back that the uniform was doing considerably better than his suit. I did not look back to see how that landed. I like to imagine it landed very well indeed.
And then there was the matter of the 6:15 to Aldershot, where a corporal made the grave error of loosening his top button in a heatwave, and a passing sergeant informed him this was a clear breach of Standing Order 214, Subsection C. A captain, overhearing, informed the sergeant that reprimanding a corporal without consulting Order 89, Paragraph 4, was itself a breach. A colonel then informed the captain that he was in breach of an order the colonel invented on the spot, purely, I suspect, because his stop was coming up. It fell finally to a brigadier at the end of the carriage, who lowered his newspaper just long enough to cite what he called Standing Order Number 1, that any officer who could recite a subsection from memory had entirely too much free time and should report for extra duty immediately. The corporal buttoned his tunic. Everyone else suddenly found their newspapers extremely interesting. As the carriage emptied at the next stop, I noticed a young private, who had said nothing throughout the entire performance, lean toward the corporal and murmur that the actual regulation on shirt buttons above 80 degrees was Standing Order 6, and that everyone else had simply been making it up as they went along, which is, on reflection, a fairly accurate description of the entire British Army between 1939 and 1945. The fourth story concerns my brief and undistinguished career in the Home Guard, prior to my transfer, when our unit was assigned to defend 3 miles of coastline against the very real possibility of German invasion. We were issued 1 rifle, 4 rounds of ammunition, and a stern instruction not to lose either. The remaining 9 men got broom handles, on the official theory that from a sufficient distance, a broom handle looks very much like a rifle. It does not. It looked like a broom handle from 12 feet in daylight to a herd of cows, which is precisely the audience we had that October morning, when 40-odd Frisians came over the ridge at a trot and Private Higgins gave the order to fall back, in what he later insisted, under oath, was a tactical repositioning. We repositioned tactically as far as the vicarage tea tent, scattering a Women's Institute cake sale in the process. I have eaten a great many Victoria sponges in my life. None as memorable as the one I ate face down in a hedge, still holding a broom. Now, if you take nothing else from tonight, take this. 3 things, in my professional and thoroughly lived experience, got Britain through those years. 1. Tea, taken at the earliest possible opportunity after anything remotely dramatic occurred. I once stopped mid-raid to insist my unit take a proper tea break, on the grounds that no bomb, however German, was going to dictate the national tea schedule. We were 9 minutes late reporting a fire. The fire, I am pleased to say, waited. 2. The stiff upper lip, the national gift for treating catastrophe and a delayed train with precisely the same arched eyebrow. My neighbor, Mrs. Aldridge, returned from the shelter to find her kitchen wall missing, looked at it for a long moment and said only, "Well, that'll want a lick of paint," then made toast on what remained of the stove. That is not composure. That is a war crime committed against drama itself, and I mean that as the highest compliment. And 3, an absolute iron refusal to admit that anything was funny until you were safely indoors, door bolted, kettle on, at which point you were permitted, just barely, to laugh until you wept, as demonstrated, rather thoroughly, by everything you've just heard. That is the lesson. Write it down. Frame it if you're so inclined. The gentleman in the very good suit, that soggy night in 1940, was not, as I had rather carelessly assumed, a mere civil servant late for a meeting. He was Brigadier Ashworth Hale, of Southern Command, in mufti, on his way to an appointment he was, it turned out, exceptionally keen not to arrive at looking like a drowned accountant. I did not learn this until 18 months later, when I reported for a routine inspection and found myself saluting the very same gentleman, considerably drier this time, standing at the head of the parade ground. He did not mention the Puddle, not once, in 3 full years. He simply developed, for the remainder of my service, a curious and entirely legitimate habit of scheduling my unit's inspections personally, at length, and, without exception, during the worst weather any given month had to offer. So, was there humor in the war? Categorically, unequivocally, no. Except, apparently, for one brigadier with an extremely long memory, a marked fondness for the rainy season, and, I later discovered, a framed photograph of a certain gentleman's outfitters on his own office wall. But that, as they say, is a story for another evening.
If you enjoyed those, there are more where they came from. Subscribe, and I'll dig up another. Next time, I'll tell you about the regimental boxing tournament Sergeant Fennick insisted on refereeing himself, badly, across 4 weight divisions simultaneously. Until then, mind the puddles, and check twice before saluting anything wearing a coat.